Sakina's trembling hands nearly dropped the bouquet as her stepmother shoved her toward the altar and hissed through clenched teeth, "Smile before you ruin this family for all of us." The cathedral was silent except for whispers and mocking laughter. Everyone knew the groom standing at the end of the aisle, Tariq Adeyemi, the once powerful CEO who had supposedly lost everything: his empire, his fortune, his name. This wedding was meant to be punishment, a humiliation. Her sister had refused to marry a bankrupt man, so Sakina had been thrown in her place like unwanted trash. But as Sakina lifted her tear-filled eyes toward her groom, her breath caught, because Tariq was not standing like a broken man. He stood like a king disguised in ruin, and the cold, unreadable look in his eyes made one thing terrifyingly clear. He knew something no one else did. Before we continue, tell me honestly, if your own family betrayed you to save themselves, would you forgive them, or make them regret it forever? And while you're watching, let me know in the comments. What country are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? If you love dramatic stories filled with betrayal, justice, and powerful emotional twists, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Long before the wedding guests began whispering over crystal glasses and polished marble, Sakina had already learned what it meant to disappear inside her own home. The Adeyemi villa stood on a green hill above the city, wide and white and gleaming in the African sun. From the gate it looked like the kind of house that promised safety, wealth, respect, the sort of place where daughters were protected and fathers were obeyed, and family meant something sacred. But inside those walls, Sakina had spent years learning the cruel difference between being sheltered and being owned. By blood, it was her father's house. By power, it belonged to Mariam. Mariam moved through the mansion like a queen who had conquered it by patience and poison. She spoke softly when guests were present, smiled with perfect grace, and touched Hassan's arm as though she were the gentlest wife in the world. But behind closed doors, her voice changed. It sharpened. It cut. Every order she gave landed like a slap. And somehow every order found Sakina. "Take these upstairs. Why is this tray still here? Did I tell you to speak? Nabira needs her dress steamed. Nabira needs tea. Nabira is resting. Nabira is upset. Nabira, Nabira, Nabira." In that house, Sakina's stepsister did not simply exist. She was orbiting royalty. Every room bent around her moods. Every servant knew to move faster when she frowned. Every family plan was built around protecting her image. Nabira was beautiful in the polished way expensive things were beautiful. Smooth skin, precise makeup, cold eyes that always looked half bored and half offended by the world. She had learned early from her mother that kindness was weakness, and that love was useful only when it could be traded for status. Sakina had learned the opposite, or rather, she had learned silence. She learned to lower her eyes when Mariam insulted the memory of her dead mother. She learned to smile faintly when guests asked why Hassan's younger daughter dressed so simply in her own home. She learned not to flinch when Nabira borrowed her things and returned them damaged, laughing, as if it were a harmless joke. She learned most of all that pain became easier for other people to ignore when you carried it quietly. Only 2 people in that house ever looked at her and seemed to see a human being. The first was Mama Zuena, the elderly housekeeper, whose knees hurt when it rained, and whose hands were rough from decades of work. She had served the family since before Mariam arrived. She still remembered Sakina as a child, before grief and humiliation had thinned her into someone too careful for her age. Sometimes late at night, in the kitchen, Mama Zuena would slide a warm cup of ginger tea into Sakina's hands and mutter, "A child should not have to earn the right to breathe in her own father's house." Sakina would smile and say she was fine. Mama Zuena never believed her. The second person was Hassan. But even that love was a broken thing. Her father had once been a large, commanding man. Photographs in his study still proved it. In them he stood straight-backed and broad-shouldered, with laughter in his eyes, and one hand resting proudly on Sakina's late mother's shoulder. In those old images, he looked like someone who could protect a family from storms. The man who lived in the villa now looked as though the storm had moved inside him. His health had worsened over the years. His hands shook when he lifted a glass. His breathing turned shallow after arguments. He signed papers he no longer had the energy to read. Mariam stood beside him through every business conversation, every family meeting, every visitor, as though she were supporting him. But Sakina had noticed what others pretended not to see. Her father never looked calmer when Mariam entered a room. He looked afraid, not always openly, not dramatically, but in the small ways that mattered. A pause before answering, a quick glance toward her face before speaking, a tired surrender in his shoulders. He loved Sakina. She knew that. Sometimes she caught it in the tremble of his voice when he called her by name, sometimes in the way his eyes lingered full of apology and shame. But love without courage was a weak shelter, and weak shelters collapsed first. The real fracture began the week Tariq Adeyemi's name entered their home. At first, Sakina heard it in fragments. A call cut short when she entered the library. Nabira laughing in the sitting room and saying, "At least he was rich enough to be worth considering." Mariam saying, "These alliances are not made for romance." Then one evening, the whole truth arrived, dressed as celebration. The dining room had been laid out with gold-rimmed plates and imported flowers. Mariam wore emerald silk. Nabira came down the stairs in a fitted cream dress and a smile that meant she expected good news. Hassan looked pale already. Sakina had not been invited to sit. She rarely was. She stood near the sideboard pouring water, invisible until needed. Then Mariam spoke. "The Adeyemi family has proposed a marriage alliance." Nabira's smile widened at once. "Tariq Adeyemi." "Yes," Mariam said. "It is a strong match. Old money. Powerful connections. Influence across half the region. Even now his name still opens doors. Even now." Sakina noticed that phrase. Nabira noticed it too, but chose excitement over caution. "So it's settled?" Mariam lifted her glass. "Nearly." For the first time in months, Hassan tried to speak with some authority. "No one is forcing anything." Nabira should at least meet him properly before Mariam's fingers touched his wrist. That was all. Just a touch. But Hassan stopped talking. Sakina looked down quickly because rage was dangerous when you were powerless. For 3 days, the house transformed. Designers came and went. Fabric samples covered the sitting room. Jewelers arrived with velvet trays. Nabira preened in mirrors and asked lazy questions about Tariq's penthouses, his cars, his private travel schedule. She did not ask what kind of man he was, only what kind of life he could fund. Sakina listened without meaning to. A famous CEO, disciplined, reserved, ruthless in business, not known for scandal, not known for softness either. Then, on the 4th day, everything changed. The news broke just after noon. Not publicly at first, quietly. Like a smell of smoke before anyone sees flames. A call came. Then another. Mariam shut herself in the study. Nabira stormed across the hallway with her phone in hand, refreshing article after article, her face draining of color and then hardening into fury. By evening, the whispers had become facts. Tariq Adeyemi's company had collapsed. Massive losses, frozen accounts, investors fleeing, contracts evaporating. His empire, according to every rumor, every headline, every delighted rival, had cracked open overnight. The mood at dinner was unrecognizable. No flowers this time. No celebration, only tension. Nabira pushed her plate away. "I'm not marrying him." Hassan looked up. "We do not even know how much of this is true." "It is true enough," Mariam snapped. 3 people called me personally." Nabira folded her arms. "Then it's finished." Hassan's jaw tightened. "A family does not destroy its word because the market shifts." A foolish family does, Mariam replied. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Sakina stood behind Hassan's chair, motionless, the way years had trained her to do. But inside something ugly curled in her stomach. She knew that tone. Mariam had made a decision. Nabira leaned back with a laugh too light to be innocent. Honestly, mother, what kind of woman throws herself away on a ruined man? Mariam's eyes moved slowly across the room and stopped on Sakina. It happened in 1 second. That was all it took. One glance, one thought, one life redirected. Sakina felt it before anyone spoke. No, Hassan said immediately, too quickly, as if he had heard the same thought and wanted to kill it before it took shape. Mariam ignored him. The wedding arrangements have already begun. The invitations are moving. The city knows of the alliance. We will not become a laughingstock because one man's fortune dipped and one girl lost her nerve. Nabira frowned. Then cancel quietly. We cannot. Yes, we can. We cannot. Mariam repeated her voice now, smooth and deadly. But we can make an adjustment. Sakina's fingers tightened around the water pitcher until they hurt. Hassan pushed back from the table. No. Mariam turned to him with that terrible calm. You are in no condition to argue. The business is already exposed. If we offend the Adeyemi name, now weakened or not, we risk every negotiation attached to it, every pending deal, every loan, every favor. Then she looked at Sakina. You will marry him. The room went cold. Sakina thought at first that she had misheard her. It was such a monstrous sentence that her mind rejected it. But then Nabira gave a short, stunned laugh. Mariam did not correct herself. Hassan rose halfway from his chair, one hand pressed to his chest. You cannot do this, he said hoarsely. Mariam's expression did not shift. I can, and I will. Sakina finally found her voice. It came out smaller than she wanted. Why me? Mariam smiled, because cruelty loved simple answers. Because she said someone in this family must still be useful. Sakina looked at her father. For one wild second she still believed he would stop it, that he would slam his hand on the table, that he would say enough, that he would choose her once, just once, over fear, over convenience, over the woman who had hollowed out their home. But Hassan only stood there shaking, caught between terror, weakness, and love that had arrived too late. That was the moment Sakina understood the truth. No one was going to save her. Not from Mariam, not from Nabira, not from the city waiting to laugh, and not from the man she was now being sent to marry like payment on a debt she never created. She lowered her eyes before anyone could see the tears gathering there. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it did not break. If I do this, she said, then at least stop calling this family honorable. No one answered, because for the first time, the truth was sitting at the table with them, and everyone could see it. The morning after the wedding felt unreal, not quiet, not peaceful, unreal. Sakina sat in the back seat of the black car that was now supposed to take her into her new life, her spine straight, her hands locked together in her lap, so tightly her knuckles ached. Outside the tinted window, the city slid past in flashes of heat and color. Street vendors beneath bright umbrellas, motorcycles weaving through traffic, glass towers catching the hard afternoon sun. It was the same city she had always known, but everything inside her had shifted. She was married, not loved, not chosen, married. Across from her sat Tariq Adeyemi, the man everyone had called ruined. He had barely spoken since they left the cathedral. No effort at small talk, no fake tenderness for the driver's benefit, no dramatic bitterness either. He simply sat there in a dark suit, one hand resting on his knee, his gaze on the passing streets, as composed as he had been at the altar. That calm unsettled her more than rage would have. A broken man should have looked broken. A humiliated man should have looked angry. Tariq looked like neither. He looked controlled, as if something deep beneath the surface had already been decided. Sakina tried not to stare at him, but she noticed everything anyway. The clean line of his jaw, the faint silver at his watch, the way even silence seemed deliberate around him. He did not slump. He did not sigh. He did not carry the air of a man who had just been publicly downgraded from society's golden sun to its cautionary tale. He carried himself like someone who had lost the right to explain himself and did not care. That frightened her. At last she spoke, because the silence was becoming louder than any argument. "Where are we going?" His eyes shifted toward her for the first time in several minutes. "Home," he said. Just one word. Calm. Low. Almost unreadable. Sakina looked back out the window. She had expected bitterness in his voice, or mockery, or some cold reminder that this arrangement had been an insult to him too. Instead, there was nothing. Nothing she could hold on to. Nothing she could prepare against. The car left the crowded center of the city and moved toward a quieter district, lined with jacaranda trees and walled properties hidden behind long stretches of stone and iron. Sakina's pulse quickened. This was not the road to a bankrupt man's collapse. It was the road to old money, privacy, and power that had learned not to announce itself. She told herself that appearances could lie. Then the gates opened. The house beyond them was not a mansion in the vulgar sense. It did not glitter. It did not scream wealth with fountains or mirrored columns or gold-plated vanity. It stood broad and still behind trimmed hedges and tall acacia trees, built in clean lines of stone, wood, and glass. Elegant, reserved, expensive in a way that did not need witnesses. Sakina stared. She had spent all night preparing herself for pity, for decay, for the kind of forced optimism poor people wore when they were trying not to drown in front of strangers. But nothing about the place ahead felt improvised or desperate. It felt chosen. The driver got out first. Tariq opened his own door without waiting for anyone and stepped onto the gravel. Even that tiny act unsettled her. Men like him, men raised in power, were usually served even in disgrace. But Tariq moved with the self-sufficiency of someone who trusted systems, not theatrics. He turned slightly and looked back at her. "Coming." Sakina blinked and stepped out. The air smelled of cut grass and sun-warmed stone. Somewhere farther down the grounds, water moved softly. A fountain, perhaps, or a narrow channel built into the landscape. Nothing around her was loud. Everything was controlled, ordered, quietly alive. This was not what ruin looked like. She followed him to the entrance, her wedding bangles still too new on her wrists, her dress replaced now with a simple blue one she had packed in a daze after the ceremony. Every step made her more alert. The polished wooden doors, the discreet security camera above the frame, the imported lanterns, the fresh arrangement of white lilies in the foyer. Inside, the silence deepened. The house opened into a cool, high-ceilinged hall washed in natural light. The floors were dark wood. The walls carried modern African art, bold and restrained at once. Nothing cluttered the space. Nothing begged to impress. Yet every detail had been selected with care. Sakina stood still. Tariq removed his watch and set it on a side table. "You'll have your own room for now." For now. The words landed with more mercy than she expected. She turned to him. "Your own room," he met her eyes. "I do not know what kind of marriage you were forced into imagining. I have no interest in forcing the rest." The sentence hit harder than cruelty would have, because it was not kind in a soft way. It was kind in a disciplined way, measured, respectful, and that made it difficult to defend herself against. She looked away first. A woman in her 50s appeared from a side corridor, dressed neatly in a cream uniform. Her face was composed but not stiff. "Sir," she said. Adana Tariq replied. "This is Sakina." The woman inclined her head with quiet dignity. "Welcome. No false sympathy. No startled glance at the substitute bride. No curiosity sharpened into gossip. Just welcome." Sakina did not know what to do with that. Tariq continued, "Prepare the East Room." Adana nodded and moved away. Sakina watched her go. "You still have staff." It came out more bluntly than she intended. Tariq did not seem offended. "A few. A few," she repeated, glancing around the house. "One should not fire loyal people to satisfy rumors," he said. Something in his tone made her look back at him sharply. There. For the first time she heard it. Not bitterness exactly, but a deeper thing beneath the calm. The memory of betrayal. The refusal to punish the faithful because the faithless had run. She lowered her gaze. "I wasn't mocking you. I know." That should have eased her. Instead, it made her more uneasy. He was reading her too easily. Adana returned a few minutes later and led Sakina upstairs. The East Room overlooked the rear garden where tall grasses bent in the wind and a stone path curved toward a shaded patio. The room itself was simple, but beautiful. A large bed, woven textiles, carved lamps. Shelves lined with books, a writing desk near the window. No wedding flowers, no romantic trap. No attempt to stage intimacy where none existed. Sakina set down the small bag she had brought from her father's house and stood in the center of the room, feeling suddenly exhausted. Adana lingered at the door. "If you need anything, ask," she said. Sakina nodded. "Thank you." The older woman hesitated, then added softly, "Sir Tariq does not like disorder, but he likes dishonesty even less." Before Sakina could decide what that meant, Adana left. By evening, the house had become even stranger. Not because anything dramatic happened, because nothing did. No creditors pounded at the gate. No desperate phone calls filled the rooms. No evidence of collapse spilled across desks in the form of unpaid bills or legal warnings. Tariq took one brief meeting in his study with a man Sakina did not know. He reviewed documents at dinner. He ate slowly without waste. He asked whether she had been settled in properly. He did not ask her to perform gratitude. When she answered yes, he simply nodded. That was all. Later, unable to sleep, Sakina stepped into the upstairs corridor for water. The house was mostly dark, lit only by low wall lamps and moonlight slipping through tall panes of glass. As she neared the staircase, she heard voices below. She stopped, not out of rudeness at first, out of instinct. A male voice, tense and low. "The board wants a public statement by Friday." Jelani, though she did not know his name yet. Tariq answered equally low. "Then they can wait. With respect, sir, waiting has costs." A pause. Then Tariq said, "So does panic." "Sir," not Mr. Adeyemi, spoken with strained politeness. Not Tariq, spoken between equals. "Sir," spoken like habit, like loyalty. Sakina moved closer by one step, hidden by the shadow of the landing. The other man continued, "Kwesi Dlamini is asking whether the reports are true. And what did you tell him that he should decide whether he values truth or headlines?" For the first time, Sakina heard something almost like dry amusement in Tariq's voice. "Then he has already decided." Paper shifted. A glass touched wood. Then the other man said, "And your wife?" Sakina went still. There was a beat of silence before Tariq answered. She stayed. Just 2 words. No warmth, no explanation. Yet something in the way he said them made her chest tighten. Not because it sounded loving, because it sounded noted, observed, filed away. as if her actions mattered more to him than her answers. The second man lowered his voice further, but Sakina still caught the question. "Do you trust her?" Another pause. When Tarek spoke, his tone was quiet enough to force her to lean closer. "I trust what she has done so far. Not yes. Not no." Sakina stepped back at once, pulse jumping. A house too polished for ruin, staff too loyal for disgrace, meetings too calm for collapse, a man too controlled for humiliation. And now this. Not trust, not affection, not distance either. Assessment. She returned to her room with the water untouched in her hand and stood by the window looking out at the moonlit garden, her thoughts twisting tighter with every passing second. At her father's house, cruelty had always been loud. It announced itself. It mocked. It struck. Here nothing announced itself. Everything was hidden behind restraint, and for the first time since the wedding, Sakina felt the shape of a different kind of danger. Maybe Tarek Adeyemi was ruined. Maybe he was not. But one thing was already clear. She had not been brought into the home of a defeated man. She had stepped into the carefully ordered silence of a man who was still watching the world and waiting for it to reveal itself, including her. By the third day of her marriage, Sakina understood one thing with painful clarity. Silence could be a test. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of safety, the silence of being watched. Tariq never hovered over her. He never questioned her directly. He did not ask what kind of daughter Mariam had raised, what kind of home had produced her obedience, or whether she had wanted to stand at that altar. He gave her space. Too much of it. Enough for her thoughts to grow teeth. At breakfast he read reports while she sat across from him, trying not to study his face. At lunch he was often out, though no one ever told her where. In the evening he returned composed, clean, unreachable, as if the world outside bent itself into order the moment he stepped near it. He was not cold in the way cruel men were cold. Cruel men enjoyed discomfort. They leaned into it. They made people smaller on purpose. Tariq's distance felt different, measured, intentional, controlled, as though he was waiting to see what she would reveal when no one pushed her. That unsettled her more than anger ever could. Sakina tried to make herself useful. She had been trained by years of humiliation to survive by usefulness. She helped Adana arrange flowers in the central hall. She folded linens. She insisted on learning where the kitchen stores were kept, though the staff clearly could manage without her. She organized a neglected shelf in the library, simply because it gave her hands something to do. No one mocked her for it. No one stopped her either. The house remained elegant, restrained, impossible to read. But the outside world was louder. Every day brought another rumor. She heard them in fragments from passing screens, overheard phone calls, the quiet mutters of drivers and delivery men at the gate. Tariq Adeyemi's losses were worse than expected. Former allies were distancing themselves. Creditors were circling. A board rebellion might be coming. A property sale was rumored. A lawsuit was whispered. And yet the gates remained polished. The garden stayed trimmed. The staff did not look panicked. Nothing matched. On the fourth afternoon, the first crack came. Sakina was in the rear garden cutting bruised leaves from a potted herb bed when Adana appeared at the stone path, her expression polite but firmer than usual. "Madame," she said softly, "your family is here." The shears nearly slipped from Sakina's hand. "My family." Adana gave a small nod. "They asked to see you privately." Privately, in Tariq's house. A coldness moved down Sakina's back. She set the shears aside and wiped her hands on a cloth. "Did Sir Tariq agree?" Adana's eyes flickered for just a second. "He is in his study." That was not an answer, which meant Tariq knew, and had allowed it. Something about that made Sakina's heartbeat quicken. She followed Adana through the side corridor rather than the main entrance. When she reached the smaller sitting room overlooking the front lawn, Mariam was already there, seated upright on a pale sofa, as if she were receiving guests in her own home. Nabira stood by the window in a fitted, rust-colored dress, one arm folded across her waist, the other holding her sunglasses like a weapon she had not yet used. Neither woman rose when Sakina entered. For one stretched second, nobody spoke. Mariam's gaze traveled over Sakina's simple dress, the lack of extravagant jewelry, the quiet room around her. Then she smiled. It was the smile of someone who smelled weakness and intended to feast on it. So she said, "This is how the fallen live." Nabira let out a soft laugh. "Better than I expected. He must still have a few scraps left." Sakina remained standing. "Why are you here?" Mariam's smile thinned. "That is not how a daughter speaks to her mother." "You are not my mother." The room hardened at once. Nabira turned from the window. "Careful. Marriage has made you bold." "No," Sakina said quietly. "Only tired." That landed harder than shouting would have. Mariam's fingers tapped once against the armrest. "We will speak plainly. Tariq's situation is deteriorating faster than we thought." "You seem very informed." Sakina replied. "We are informed because, unlike you, we understand what is at stake." Sakina felt the old pressure building behind her ribs. In her father's house, these conversations always went the same way. They started with superiority, then insult, then demand. The only question was how long Mariam would pretend otherwise. She did not have to wait long. "You need to find out what remains," Mariam said. Sakina stared at her. "What? The accounts? The assets? The properties that have not yet been touched? The names of any loyal investors? Anything hidden?" Mariam leaned forward slightly. "A man like Tariq does not fall without trying to save something." Nabira added almost lazily, "You are his wife, at least in public. Get close enough and he'll talk." The words were so shameless that for a moment Sakina could only look at them. Then she asked, "You came here to turn me into a spy?" Mariam did not even blink. "Do not dramatize what is simple." "What is simple," Sakina said, her voice sharpening, "is that you threw me into this marriage to protect yourselves. Now that you think he is sinking, you want to use me again." Nabira rolled her eyes. "Use you, please. We gave you a chance to become something useful." Sakina laughed. It shocked even her. Not because it was joyful, because it was the sound of a wound finally refusing to pretend it was not bleeding. "A chance," she repeated. "You mean a sacrifice?" Nabira's face cooled. "You should be grateful. Without this marriage, you would still be floating through the house like a ghost no one wanted. The cruelty of it should have broken Sakina. Instead, it clarified her. For the first time in years, she was not standing in her father's dining room. She was not trapped between Mariam's glare and Hassan's silence. She was in another house now, a quieter house, a stranger house, a house whose owner was impossible to read. But it was enough distance for truth to breathe. Sakina lifted her chin. "I will not do it." Mariam's eyes darkened. "Think carefully." "I have." "You do not understand the danger." "No," Sakina said. "I understand it perfectly. I understood it the day you looked at me across that table and decided I was cheaper than your pride." A pulse beat visibly in Mariam's jaw. Nabira stepped closer. "Do not be stupid, Sakina. You think loyalty to a ruined man will make you noble. It will make you hungry. It will make you irrelevant. When he has nothing left, do you think he will protect you?" The question struck deeper than Nabira knew, because that fear already lived inside Sakina. At night in the dark, it whispered to her, what if Tariq was only being decent because he still had some control left? What if ruin had not fully arrived yet? What if when it did, Kindness would vanish and desperation would take its place. But fear was not the same as betrayal. She drew a slow breath. "Whatever he becomes," she said, "I will not sell him to you." The silence that followed felt electric. Mariam stood. When she rose to full height, the room seemed smaller. "Do not confuse morality with intelligence. This family carried you for years." "No," Sakina said. "My mother's memory carried me. Mama Zuena's kindness carried me. My own silence carried me. You only taught me how cheaply some people can trade blood." For one instant, Mariam looked as if she might slap her. Instead, she smiled. That was worse. "Then let us speak in consequences," she said softly. "If you refuse to help us, do not expect help from us when this disaster consumes you. Do not come begging when that man's creditors tear apart what little dignity you still have." Sakina said nothing. Mariam took one slow step closer. "And there is one more thing," she added. "The jewelry box your mother left. The letters, the cloth bundle from her family. All of it still sits in my locked cabinet." Sakina went cold. Mariam saw it and knew exactly where to press harder. "If you want those things preserved," she said, "you will remember where your loyalties should be." The room blurred for a second around the edges. Her mother's letters, the only things truly hers. Nabira's voice slipped in, almost cheerful. "Honestly, this should not be difficult. Smile at your husband. Listen well. Report back. If he is finished, we step away before the city laughs at us too. If he has hidden reserves, we position ourselves before others do. Position ourselves, as if human beings were furniture, as if marriage were a corridor to loot." Sakina's hands trembled once, then stilled. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "If you touch my mother's things, I will never forgive you." Mariam gave a tiny shrug. Forgiveness is a luxury for people with options. She turned as though the matter were closed. But before she could take another step, Sakina said the one sentence she had never before dared to say in Mariam's face. "You are wrong." Both women stopped. Sakina looked directly at her stepmother. "Options are not the same as conscience. You lost yours a long time ago. I still have mine." Nabira made a disgusted sound. "Pathetic," maybe Sakina said, "but not for sale." Mariam's eyes sharpened into something almost murderous. Then, without another word, she walked past Sakina and out into the corridor. Nabira lingered half a second longer. When she leaned close, her perfume was expensive and suffocating. "You think he will choose you?" she whispered. "Men like Tariq do not choose women like you. If he is testing anyone, it is only because he already expects you to fail." Then she smiled and followed her mother out. Sakina stood alone in the sitting room, her pulse hammering so hard it hurt. For several long breaths, she did not move. Then she became aware of something. Not a sound exactly, a presence. She turned slowly toward the partially open double doors leading to the hallway beyond. At the far end, near the shadowed mouth of the corridor that led toward the study, someone stood motionless. Tariq. He had not stepped into the room. He had not interrupted. He had heard enough. Maybe all of it. His expression did not change. No praise, no anger, no comfort. Only that same unreadable stillness. Sakina's breath caught. He held her gaze for one long second, then said in a calm, even voice, "Adana will have tea sent up to your room." That was all. Then he turned and walked away. Sakina stared after him, shaken for reasons she could barely name. Because he had known they were here. Because he had let the conversation happen. Because he had listened. And because his silence once again felt less like indifference now, and more like a man waiting for the truth to choose its own voice. That night, Sakina could not sleep. The house was too still. The kind of stillness that made every thought sound louder than it was. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the afternoon in fragments. Mariam's threat, Nabira's sneer. Tariq standing in the hallway like a witness who had chosen not to intervene. He had heard enough. She knew he had. And yet he had said nothing. No thank you. No accusation. No warning. Just that calm sentence about Tie, as if the moment had been too ordinary to deserve emotion. It should have offended her. Instead, it unsettled her in a stranger way. Because the more she thought about Tariq, the less he fit into any shape she understood. Cruel men she understood. Weak men, too. Even broken men made sense to her. But Tariq was none of those things. He was composed without softness, distant without contempt, attentive without seeming attached. Every reaction he withheld created a question in her mind. Every silence seemed to conceal another layer. By morning she was exhausted. Still routine saved her from unraveling. She dressed simply and went downstairs earlier than usual, expecting to find only staff in the kitchen. Instead, she found Adana supervising breakfast trays, while soft sunlight filtered through the high windows and drew pale gold lines across the counters. Adana glanced at her once. "You are awake early. I could not sleep." Adana nodded as if sleeplessness were a respectable language. "Would you like tea?" "Yes, please." While Adana prepared it, Sakina reached for a tray of sliced fruit and began arranging it more neatly, more from nervous habit than usefulness. Adana watched her for a second, then said, "He noticed." Sakina's fingers paused over a slice of papaya. "What?" "That you refused them." The older woman's tone remained neutral, but the sentence landed with a surprising force. Sakina looked up. He said that numbered Adana placed the teacup in front of her. He does not say much, but he noticed. Sakina looked down at the steam curling from the cup. That should not have mattered. A man noticing was not the same as a man caring. Still warmth moved through her chest before caution quickly covered it. She carried her tea to the breakfast room. Tariq was already there, seated at the long table with a tablet to one side, and several printed pages arranged in a precise stack near his hand. He looked up when she entered, then back down at the documents, as though acknowledging her presence was enough. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." She sat. A few quiet moments passed while staff moved in and out. Sakina told herself to eat, not think, to let the silence remain only silence. Then Tariq spoke without lifting his eyes. "Your family should not return here without notice again." Sakina looked at him. It was such a controlled sentence that it took her a second to feel what lived beneath it. Not anger exactly. Boundary. She swallowed. "I did not invite them. I know." 2 words. Steady. Certain. He believed that much, at least. Her chest tightened unexpectedly. "They threatened me," she said, before she could stop herself. Now he looked up. Not dramatically. Not with open shock. But fully. "With what?" She hesitated. Some old instinct still warned her against telling truths that could be used later. Yet something in his face, perhaps the absence of greed, perhaps the absence of impatience, made lying feel pointless. "My mother's things," she said quietly. "The things she left behind. Mariam kept them." Something changed in his gaze then. Small but real. A darkening. "Letters?" he asked. Sakina blinked. "Yes. And other personal effects?" "Yes." He set down the page he was holding. "You should have told me." The answer slipped from her before caution could shape it. "I didn't know I was allowed." The room went very still. Tariq said nothing for a long second. His face gave little away, but she could almost see the meaning of her words landing between them. Not as accusation, as fact. In her world, permission had always mattered more than pain. At last he said, "You are allowed." The words were simple, but they opened a strange ache in her. Allowed to what? To speak, to ask, to be defended. She looked down at her untouched breakfast, suddenly afraid of what hope might do if she fed it too early. Later that afternoon, the first true crack in the public story appeared. Sakina had gone to the city with Adana and a driver to pick up household items from a specialty market. It was not an outing for pleasure. The list in her hand was practical soap spices, fresh herbs, replacement thread for embroidered linens. Still being outside the house helped. The market was housed in a polished indoor complex where old wealth and new money brushed shoulders beneath bright skylights and curated displays. Designers, lawyers, investors' wives, men who talked too loudly into expensive phones, the kind of place where news traveled faster than truth. Sakina moved carefully through the aisles, aware that her face might now be recognizable in certain circles. The replacement bride. The girl married off to the fallen CEO. She kept her head lowered and focused on the list. Then it happened. A man in a navy suit turned into the spice corridor from the opposite end, speaking to the younger associate beside him. He stopped the moment he saw her. Not stared. Stopped. The associate nearly walked into him. Sakina recognized the older man a moment later from business magazines left around her father's study. Kwesi Dlamini, one of the region's most visible financiers. A man who appeared in photographs beside ministers' industry boards and foundations. Exactly the sort of person who should have already abandoned Tariq if the rumors were true. For one stretched second, Sakina braced herself for pity or polite avoidance. Instead, Kwesi inclined his head. Not casually. Respectfully. "Mrs. Adeyemi," he said. The title struck her harder than his tone. She had expected curiosity. Perhaps condescension. Perhaps the delicate falseness rich men used when they were enjoying scandal, but pretending not to. But this was not that. This was recognition. Real and measured. Sakina managed good afternoon. His eyes flicked once to the basket in her hand, then back to her face. "I hope you are well." "Yes," she said, though the answer felt inadequate. Kwesi nodded. "Please give my regards to Tariq. Not Mr. Adeyemi. Not that man. Tariq." A name spoken with the ease of someone who knew him as an equal and the caution of someone who still weighed his own position carefully. Before she could answer, the younger associate leaned closer to him and whispered something too low to catch. Kwesi's mouth hardened almost imperceptibly. Then he said more quietly, "These are noisy times. Do not believe every performance dressed as certainty." Her pulse skipped. He was gone before she could respond, walking on with the associate trailing behind him. Sakina stood rooted to the polished floor, her shopping basket suddenly heavier in her hand. Adana, who had been examining packaged tea nearby, returned to her side and said nothing for several steps. Then, in a tone so neutral it was almost invisible, she asked, "Did he greet you politely?" Sakina turned to her. "You know who that was?" "Yes." He spoke as if... She stopped, as if Sir Tariq were not a man abandoned by the world Adana supplied. Sakina lowered her voice. Why would he? Adana adjusted the edge of her shawl. Because people with real power do not all panic at the same time. Some run, some wait, some watch who runs. The words followed Sakina through the rest of the market. By the time they returned home, her mind was no longer merely suspicious. It was alert. The rumors had cracks, not tiny ones either. Meaningful ones. That evening another appeared. Just before dinner, Sakina crossed the upstairs gallery and heard voices coming from Tariq's study below. The door was not fully closed. She had not intended to listen, but one name stopped her. Nabira. She froze. Jelani's voice carried first. "Calm, efficient. She has increased contact with Imani. They are still feeding stories through the same channels. A pause. Tariq replied, "Let them. They are becoming bolder. They always do when they believe no one is collecting the evidence." Sakina's breath caught. Collecting? Evidence? Jelani continued, "There is also the matter of the board. 2 members want reassurance, and the others waiting." "Good," Tariq said. "Waiting is useful." Useful. Not frightening. Not ruinous. Useful. Sakina stepped back before the floor itself could expose her. Her pulse was beating too fast now, not from fear, but from the pressure of understanding assembling itself piece by piece. He was not drowning. Or if he was drowning with remarkable control. At dinner she could barely taste the food. Tariq noticed, of course. He seemed to notice everything. "You have been quiet," he said. Sakina looked up. The candles between them burned low and steady. Shadows moved softly across the room. "I met someone today." Tariq waited. Quesi de Lamini. Something unreadable passed through his face. "Did you—" "He greeted me." She held his gaze now, respectfully. Tariq set down his fork. "And that surprised you?" "Yes." "Why? Because nothing about your life makes sense," she thought. "Because people do not speak carefully about broken men unless the brokenness is temporary, false, or dangerous to misjudge. Because every day in this house feels less like the aftermath of collapse and more like the inside of a locked room where the truth is being kept on purpose." But she only said, "Because that is not how people treat failure." A faint shadow of something, not quite a smile, not quite approval, touched Tariq's mouth and vanished. "No," he said. "It isn't." The answer sat between them like a match dropped onto dry grass. Sakina leaned forward slightly. "Then what exactly am I living inside, Tariq?" He did not answer immediately. Outside, somewhere beyond the glass, night insects thrummed in the garden. The whole house seemed to hold its breath with her. Then Tariq looked at her with calm, steady eyes and said, "A season of revelation. Nothing more. No explanation. No denial." But for Sakina it was enough, because in that moment the last of the public lie cracked open, and through the crack she saw the first sharp outline of a truth much larger than bankruptcy. A truth Nabira had been too vain to question. Mariam too greedy to see, and Sakina herself was only now beginning to understand. Tariq Adeyemi had not vanished from power. He had stepped back into shadow, and from there he was watching everyone reveal who they really were. The scandal broke on a Thursday. Not all at once. Not with a single headline or one clean public accusation. It spread the way. Poison spread through water quietly, first invisibly, then everywhere at once. By 9 in the morning, Sakina noticed the first sign. Adana's phone vibrated twice in quick succession while they were reviewing fresh flowers for the dining room. The older woman never checked personal messages while working. This time she glanced down. Her face did not change, but her hand went still over the vase. By 10, Jelani arrived without appointment. He moved through the entrance hall with unusual speed, greeted no one beyond a clipped nod, and disappeared straight into Tariq's study. The household did not panic. That was what unsettled Sakina. In chaotic homes, people rushed when danger came. In Tariq's home, they became quieter. By 11, the driver avoided her eyes, and by noon, her own phone began to ring. It was an unknown number. Sakina stared at the screen before answering. "Hello." For a moment there was only breath. Then a woman's voice, eager and false with pity. "Sakina." "This is Imani, Nabira's friend." Sakina closed her eyes briefly. "Of course. Yes." "Oh, thank God you answered. I was worried about you." Imani had never worried about her a single day in her life. Sakina said nothing. The woman continued, lowering her voice as if she were sharing a sacred secret. People are talking. I thought you should know before it gets worse. Her stomach tightened. Talking about what? A pause. Then the sentence came like a knife wrapped in silk. They're saying you've been meeting another man behind Tariq's back. Sakina went cold. Imani rushed on before she could speak. I don't know if it's true, of course. I told them it could be jealousy. But there are photos, Sakina. Grainy, but still. And some people are saying you only married Tariq to get inside whatever remains of his fortune. The room around Sakina seemed to tilt. What photos? Oh. Imani made a small sound of artificial hesitation. You haven't seen them. Sakina's grip tightened around the phone. What photos? From the market. From outside the textile district last week. There's one where a man is speaking closely to you. Another where you're getting into a car. It looks... She let the silence finish the sentence. Compromising. Sakina understood instantly. Not because the accusation made sense, because it did not need to. A market meeting, a conversation, a car door. Angles, timing, cropping, suggestion. That was enough to ruin women. It always had been. She ended the call without another word. For several seconds she simply stood there, phone still in her hand, her pulse beating hard and hollow inside her throat. Then she opened her messages. There they were, forwarded from an unknown number. 3 photos. In the first, she stood in the spice corridor at the market, while Kwesi Dlamini faced her. The shot had been taken from behind him close enough to make the interaction seem intimate instead of formal. In the second, Kwesi appeared to be leaning toward her. He had only lowered his voice. The frame made it look private. In the third, Sakina was stepping into the car outside the market while a male figure stood near the open door. The driver blurred by distance, and cropping looked like a man seeing her off after a secret meeting. A story had already been built. All it needed now was an audience willing to enjoy it. Her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was shame, though she had done nothing wrong. That angered her most. The body learned humiliation faster than logic. Even innocence could feel dirty when accusation moved quickly enough. She looked up and saw Tariq standing in the doorway. He had approached so quietly she had not heard him. His expression was unreadable but not blank. It was the face of a man already aware. How long, he asked. The question was so controlled that it took her a moment to process it. You know. Yes. She swallowed. Imani called just now. Show me. Sakina hesitated, then crossed the room and handed him the phone. He studied the images in complete silence. No dramatic reaction, no visible jealousy, no immediate demand for explanation. Somehow that hurt more. She watched his face and hated herself for doing it, for searching his eyes, like a child searching weather. Finally he returned the phone. Jelani is tracing the source. Sakina stared. That's all. His gaze settled on her. What would you prefer, fury? Something in her snapped. No, she said too quickly. I would prefer not to look at you and wonder whether you believe them. The words landed between them like shattered glass. For a second Tariq said nothing. Then he asked very evenly, Do you expect me to decide in under an hour what kind of person you are? She almost laughed from the pain of it. Isn't that how it usually works? She asked. A woman gets accused. People study her face, her tone, the angle of her silence, and then decide whether she sounds pure enough to deserve mercy. His jaw shifted slightly. You think I am people? I think Sakina said, her voice trembling despite her effort to control it, that I do not know what you are when your pride is touched. That changed something. Not dramatically, but enough. Tariq took one step closer. My pride has been touched many times. Then perhaps you have become good at hiding what it does to you. A long silence followed. Sakina hated how exposed she felt, hated the heat behind her eyes, hated that some part of her wanted him to say, "I know you did not do this. I know you. I trust you." But he did not say it, and maybe that was the problem. Because after all his hidden truths and quiet tests, after all his careful observation, she still did not know whether she existed in his life as a wife, a subject, or a result. Tariq spoke at last. "Who do you think arranged this?" Sakina looked away. "Nabira, Mariam, possibly Imani. Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters to you because of evidence. It matters to me because it is my life." His eyes stayed on her face. "I am aware." "No," she said. "You are informed. That is not the same thing." The sentence came out sharper than she intended, but once spoken, it could not be taken back. And it was true. Tariq understood facts very quickly. Patterns, moves, traps, weaknesses. But pain was slower, messier, less structured. He stood in front of her for one heavy second, then said, "There will be an event tomorrow evening." She blinked. "What, a foundation dinner? We were already expected. We will attend." The blood drained from her face. "Attend, yes." She stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You want me to walk into a room full of people after this? I want them to see whether you hide." The cruelty of the sentence hit her so hard she almost stepped back. Or perhaps she said softly, "You want to see it too." For the first time since she had known him, Tariq flinched. It was tiny, barely visible, but real. Still he did not withdraw the decision. "The invitation stands," he said. "You may refuse if you choose." Choose. There was that word again. That elegant word powerful people used when the road in front of you had already been narrowed by consequences. If she refused, the city would call it guilt. If she went, they would study her like a trial exhibit. Her throat ached. "I see," she said. Tariq looked as if he wanted to add something. Instead, he turned and left. By afternoon, the story had spread further. 2 social accounts with large followings posted vague captions about betrayal in high society. A gossip site hinted that the replacement bride had always had ambitions bigger than marriage. Someone circulated an old, harmless image of Sakina speaking to a university classmate years ago, implying a history of secret attachments. The lies multiplied because lies loved speed, and truth always arrived dressed too slowly. At 4, Mariam called. Sakina almost did not answer. Almost. But some instincts were born from old wars. She picked up. Mariam did not waste time with greetings. "You should have listened." Sakina's mouth went dry. "So this is your work?" "My work?" Mariam sounded amused. "No. This is what happens when a girl forgets who protects her. You call this protection, I call it correction." Sakina closed her eyes. Mariam continued smooth as poison. "Come home. Leave before the humiliation worsens. Public sympathy is still possible if you cry at the right moment." Sakina let out a shaking breath. "You did this. I warned you that conscience is expensive." Then the line went dead. That evening the house felt colder, though nothing visible had changed. Sakina stood alone in her room long after sunset, staring at the dress laid out for the foundation dinner. Dark green, elegant, severe. Adana had placed it there with no commentary, as if dignity itself could be pressed into fabric. A soft knock came. Adana entered when Sakina allowed it. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the older woman crossed the room, adjusted the position of the dress on the bed, and said, "There is a kind of humiliation people give you, and another kind you accept for them. The second one destroys more." Sakina looked at her reflection in the mirror. "And if I cannot bear either," Adana's hand stilled. "Then walk in anyway," she said. Let those who lie be the ones who tremble. After she left, Sakina remained alone with the silence, with fear, with anger, with the memory of Tariq's restraint and the ache of what he had not said. At last she stepped toward the bed and touched the dress, not because she felt brave, because she felt cornered, and because something inced her, something bruised and stubborn and no longer willing to crawl, refused to disappear just to make liars comfortable. Tomorrow night she would enter the fire. Whether Tariq stood beside her as husband, strategist, or judge, she did not yet know. But one truth had already hardened inside her. If he watched her fall without reaching for the truth, then he would lose more than a test. He would lose her. The foundation dinner was held at the Kijini Grand Hotel, the kind of place built for power to admire itself. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over polished black floors. Tall arrangements of white orchids stood like carefully staged innocents. At the edges of the ballroom, servers moved soundlessly through the crowd with silver trays and lowered eyes. Everywhere Sakina looked, wealth shimmered in expensive fabric. Old diamonds, soft laughter, and the practiced ease of people who believed disgrace only happened to other families. Tonight, many of those people had come for charity, but they had stayed for scandal. Sakina felt it the moment she stepped through the main doors on Tariq's arm. Conversations bent, faces turned. A ripple moved through the room so quickly it might as well have been sound. There she is, the replacement bride, the girl in the photos, the wife who was either being framed or too foolish to hide better. Sakina kept her spine straight and her breathing measured. The dark green gown Adana had chosen fit her with understated elegance. No excessive jewels, no desperate glamour, just dignity sharpened into silk. Beside her, Tariq wore black. He looked exactly as he had looked on the wedding day, controlled, unreadable, impossible to diminish. If the whispers touched him, they did not stay long enough to leave a mark. That infuriated some people instantly. Sakina saw it in the tightened smiles, the narrowed eyes, the way a few men who had once likely shaken Tariq's hand now nodded, as if acknowledging an unfortunate relative rather than a peer. Tariq guided her father into the room without hurry. "Do not look for mercy," he said quietly, without moving his lips much. "You will find performance instead." Sakina kept her gaze forward. "That sounds like experience speaking." "It is." The answer should have comforted her. It did not. Not fully. Because experience was not the same as protection. At the center of the ballroom stood a circular stage set for speeches, awards, and donor announcements. Around it, tables curved outward like petals, each one populated by names Sakina had heard for years from the edges of rooms where she was never meant to belong: bankers, politicians, company chairs, founders, widows with old influence and younger lovers. And near the third pillar on the west side, dressed in gold and self-satisfaction, stood Nabira. Their eyes met at once. Nabira smiled, not warmly, not even triumphantly, cruelly. The smile of a person who had already imagined the humiliation ahead and was enjoying its shape before it fully arrived. Next to her stood Imani in silver, pretending to be surprised to see Sakina there at all. Mariam was not visible at first, but Sakina knew she was somewhere in the room. Mariam never missed the moment before a trap tightened. "Of course they came," Sakina murmured. Tariq's hand remained lightly at her back, steady, but not possessive. They would never miss a public execution. She almost asked, "And what are we here for?" Instead, she followed him to their assigned table. The evening began with music and speeches. A violinist played softly near the stage. A host in a tailored ivory suit welcomed donors and praised compassion, resilience, and social responsibility, with the bright, false tone of someone who had never truly met any of those things. Applause rose and fell. Glasses clinked. Names were announced. And still the scandal moved underneath it all. Sakina could feel it in fragments. A woman at the next table, leaning too close to whisper behind manicured fingers. A man glancing at his phone, then up at her, then quickly away. The deliberate over-kindness of strangers who thought softness itself was a form of gossip. At last, the first direct attack came. It arrived wearing perfume. Imani approached with a sympathetic expression so polished it might have cracked if she smiled too hard. "Sakina," she said, touching her own chest lightly. "You look brave." Sakina held her gaze. "That sounds dangerously close to admiration." Imani laughed a fraction too late. "I only meant tonight cannot be easy." Tariq did not rise. He did not greet her. He simply looked at her once, and whatever she saw in his eyes made her shift almost imperceptibly before continuing. "We were all so concerned," Imani said. "These rumors become so vicious. One never knows what is true anymore." Sakina answered before Tariq could. "Then perhaps people should stop helping rumors dress themselves as truth." Imani's smile thinned. "I would hate for anyone to misunderstand my intentions. And I would hate for someone to confuse cruelty with concern," Sakina said. For one blessed second, Imani had no reply. Then Nabira arrived. She slipped into the opening like a blade entering silk. "Well," Nabira said, taking in Sakina from head to toe, "you certainly know how to make an entrance after disgrace." Sakina remained seated. "And you certainly know how to appear whenever rot smells strongest." The line landed harder than she expected. Imani's eyes widened. Nabira's smile disappeared. Across the table, Tariq said nothing. That silence cut both ways now. It terrified Sakina and empowered her at once. Nabira tilted her head. "You should be careful. Pride looks ridiculous on women who have no position." Sakina looked up at her calmly. "If I had no position, you would not be standing here trying to take it back." Nabira's face changed. Not much, but enough. Because the sentence had found the bruise. Before she could answer, the host's voice rose from the stage. "And now we would like to invite several of our distinguished guests to join us later for a brief statement on integrity in leadership during uncertain times." The irony was so grotesque that Sakina nearly laughed. Names were announced: a minister, a philanthropist, a banking chairman. Then Mr. Tariq Adeyemi. The room altered. It happened instantly. People who had been sipping wine mid-conversation went still. Heads turned not discreetly now, but openly. Nabira blinked. Imani's hand tightened around her clutch. Somewhere behind them, a fork hit a plate with a sharp, metallic note. Sakina turned slowly toward Tariq. He rose without surprise. Of course he had known. Of course. He adjusted his jacket with calm precision, then looked at Sakina. "Stay seated," he said softly. Something in her resisted at once. "Why?" "Because they are looking for movement," he replied. "Do not give them panic." Then he walked toward the stage. The murmurs began immediately. "Why would they include him? I thought he was finished. Who approved that?" No serious board would, but the host was already smiling too brightly and extending a hand. Tariq did not take. Tariq stepped into the light. No notes, no hesitation, no visible fall from grace. Sakina watched the room watch him. This, more than anything else, exposed the lie they had all been clinging to. People do not stare at ruined men like that. They do not calculate around them with that much tension. They do not brace. They dismiss. This was not dismissal. This was uncertainty sharpened into fear. Tariq accepted the microphone. For years he began his voice smooth and carrying effortlessly through the ballroom. Many people in this room have spoken eloquently about integrity. Not one whisper remained. Some meant it. Some used it decoratively. Hard times have a useful habit of revealing which is which. A few faces froze. He continued unhurried. The market shifts. Headlines multiply. Rumors are dressed-fed and sent into rooms like this one. In such seasons, people often become very honest very quickly. Loyal people stay loyal. Cowards become strategic. Opportunists call themselves practical. Liars call themselves informed. The last word landed like a slap. Across the ballroom, Nabira's hand lowered from her glass. Tariq's gaze moved once across the room, not randomly, deliberately. A sweep, a measurement. "I have learned more in recent weeks," he said, "about character than I did in years of polished meetings and expensive promises." He paused, then added, "And I have also learned that truth, unlike rumor, requires patience. It does not scream for attention. It waits. It gathers. And eventually it names people." Sakina's pulse began to hammer. This was not a speech. This was a warning. The audience felt it too. One of the older financiers shifted in his chair. The minister's smile had gone rigid. Even the violinist at the side of the room seemed to understand that music had no place here anymore. Then Tariq looked directly toward Sakina, only for a moment. But in that moment, something passed between them. Not softness, not apology, recognition. The public kind, the dangerous kind. When he spoke again, his tone sharpened by only a degree, yet the room seemed to contract around it. "Tonight," he said, "before this event concludes, a matter of false accusation will be addressed." Now the ballroom erupted, not loudly, but irreversibly. A surge of whispers, several people reaching for phones, someone standing halfway before sitting back down, Nabira taking one involuntary step backward, Imani going pale. Sakina felt the floor beneath her feet become something unstable and electric. Tariq did not look at either of them. "Because reputations are not toys," he said. "Marriage is not a marketplace, and women are not disposable shields for family ambition." The sentence struck Sakina so hard she forgot to breathe. All around her, faces turned again, not toward scandal now, but toward structure, toward understanding, toward the possibility that they had been invited not to witness a fallen man's embarrassment, but to stand inside his chosen arena. Tariq handed back the microphone. The host reached for it with trembling fingers, and then, before anyone could recover, Jelani appeared from the side entrance with 2 security officers and a tablet in hand. He moved directly toward the stage. Nabira whispered. It was barely audible, but Sakina heard it. For the first time that night, fear crossed Nabira's face without makeup to soften it. Imani grabbed her wrist. "What is happening?" Nabira yanked free. "I don't know." That was a lie. Sakina could see it. At the stage, Jelani spoke quietly to the host, then to Tariq. The giant screen behind them, originally prepared for charity slides and donor acknowledgements, flickered once. Then again. Then changed. The ballroom fell into a silence so complete that it felt engineered. A file opened on the screen. Not photos of Sakina, metadata, timestamps, source paths, transfer logs, names. The first slide was simple enough for anyone to understand. Origin of manipulated images. Below it were 3 sender routes, one traced to a private media contractor, one to an account registered under Imani's assistant, and one to a device linked the room inhaled as one to Nabira Adebayo. Nabira took another step back. Imani made a choking sound. "Nabira, shut up!" Nabira snapped. Too late. The room had heard. Sakina felt something inside her crack open, not from pain this time, but from the terrible force of release. Around the ballroom, shock was changing form. Not gossip now. Judgment. Public. Rapid. Ruthless. Jelani spoke into a second microphone, clear and formal. Forensic review confirms image manipulation, coordinated dissemination, and intentional defamation targeting. Mrs. Sakina Adeyemi. Mrs. Sakina Adeyemi. No one whispered over that title now. No one dared. Tariq stood beside Jelani, one hand in his pocket, calm as ever. But now the calm was no longer ambiguous. It had teeth. Nabira's eyes flashed wildly toward the doors, toward the stage, toward Sakina, as if searching for one weak point left in the room. She found none, because the truth had arrived. Not as rumor, not as plea, as evidence. And everyone who had come expecting to watch Sakina bend under humiliation was now watching something else entirely, the first clean fracture in the lie that had protected cruel people for years. Sakina rose slowly from her seat, not because anyone told her to, because at last the room was standing on truth, and she was no longer the one shaking. No one moved at first. That was the strange thing about public disgrace when it changed direction. People always imagined scandal as noise, screaming, gasps, chaos. But when truth landed with enough force, the first reaction was often stillness. A room full of powerful people suddenly trying to understand how quickly the ground beneath them had changed. On the giant screen behind Tariq, the evidence remained cold and bright. Message routes, timestamps, edited image layers, payment trails, a contractor's invoice, a private assistant's forwarding chain, Nabira's device ID, Imani's account activity. Facts were ugly in their own way. They did not plead. They did not dramatize. They simply stood there and refused to disappear. Sakina remained beside her chair, one hand lightly touching the table edge, more to steady the rush inside her than her body. Her pulse was still racing, but the panic was gone. In its place came something almost more overwhelming, vindication. Not soft, not pretty, sharp, painful even. Because justice, when it finally arrived, forced her to feel not only relief, but the full weight of what had almost been done to her. Across the ballroom, Nabira looked as if someone had stripped away the polished version of her face and left only the raw machinery underneath. For the first time since Sakina had known her, she looked less arrogant than desperate. Imani was the first to break. "This is insane," she said too loudly. "There must be some mistake." No one answered her, because no one believed that anymore. Jelani stood near the stage with the composure of a man who had expected precisely this moment. He tapped the tablet once. The next screen appeared. A chain of messages. Short, vicious, efficient. Use the market shots. Crop tighter. Make it look private. Push it through the gossip accounts first. If she refuses to run, humiliate her harder. The sender names were partially masked, but not enough to protect anyone in that room from understanding who had written them. A whisper passed through the crowd, like a shiver through dry grass. Sakina heard pieces of it. My God, they fabricated all of it. Over a marriage, no. Over money. Over power, Sakina thought. Over the terror of losing control. Nabira found her voice at last. "This proves nothing," she said, stepping forward. Anyone could fake messages. Too fast. Too defensive. Too late. Tariq turned his head slightly and looked at her. It was not a dramatic stare. That made it worse. There was no rage in it, no need to perform anger, only the calm attention of a man who had measured her long ago and was now letting her finish sinking herself. "Continue," he said to Jelani. Another file opened. This time, audio. The ballroom speakers hummed softly. Then Mariam's voice filled the room. Smooth, controlled, familiar enough to freeze Sakina where she stood. If she will not help willingly, then make sure she has no dignity left to protect. Sakina's fingers tightened on the chair. The next voice was Nabira's. She always cared too much about being seen as good. Once people think she is dirty, she'll either crawl back or break. Imani laughed in the recording. And if Tariq believes it, Rick. Mariam answered. Then all the better. A man already falling does not need much help to destroy his own wife. The recording ended. This time the silence did not hold. It cracked. A series of reactions broke across the room. Murmurs, sharp intakes of breath chairs, shifting the brittle sound of someone setting down a glass too hard. Even the host, who had spent the night smiling for donors, looked physically ill. Sakina felt the blood drain from her face. Not because she was shocked Mariam had said it, because hearing it aloud before all these people made the cruelty real in a different way. Private pain had become public evidence. And some part of her younger self, the quiet girl in her father's house, who had learned to swallow every injury without naming it, did not know whether to cry or collapse. Instead, she stood still. Across the room, Nabira pointed at the stage with a trembling hand. "You recorded us," Jelani answered before Tariq did. "No. Someone in your mother's employ grew tired of being paid to carry filth. That landed like another blow. A servant, a witness, someone close enough to hear, someone who had finally chosen truth over fear." Nabira turned pale. Then the ballroom doors opened again. Every head turned. Mariam entered late, dressed in deep burgundy silk, her posture regal enough that for one absurd second she almost looked capable of controlling the room by force of will alone. She had clearly expected a different scene. Her expression still carried the poised impatience of a woman prepared to watch someone else be destroyed. Then she saw the screen. She stopped. The shift in her face was small. Most people might not have caught it. Sakina did. That single fractured second when confidence gave way to calculation. Mariam recovered quickly. Of course she did. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, walking forward. No one rushed to answer. No one rushed to comfort. That, more than anything, told Sakina how fully the balance had changed. Tariq stepped down from the stage. He did not raise his voice. The room quieted anyway. "The meaning," he said, "is that falsehood becomes expensive when directed at the wrong people." Mariam lifted her chin. "You presume too much. I seldom need to presume." The sentence was so calm it sliced cleanly. Mariam's eyes moved to Sakina then, and in that instant Sakina saw the same thing she had seen all her life. Not maternal anger, not disappointment, not even hatred exactly. Ownership challenged, a possession refusing its assigned role. "You," Mariam said, as if Sakina were somehow responsible for this reversal, "you brought private family matters into public shame." Something hot and steady rose inside Sakina. Not panic, not even outrage. A clarity sharpened by years. She stepped away from the table fully and faced the woman who had ruled her life through fear. "You forfeited the right to call it family," Sakina said. The room heard every word. Mariam's mouth tightened. "Mind your tone." "No." One syllable. It seemed to echo. For years, Sakina had imagined this confrontation differently. In secret, in tears, in some quiet room where she would finally tell the truth, and Mariam would deny it, and the walls would hold the rest. But truth had chosen a ballroom, 100 witnesses, and the kind of light that left nowhere to hide. "You used my mother's memory to control me," Sakina said, her voice stronger now. "You used my father's illness to silence him. You used Nabira's vanity to justify cruelty. And when I refused to betray my husband, you tried to destroy what little dignity I had left." Mariam laughed once, but there was no warmth in it. "Dignity, child. I fed you. I housed you. I taught you how the world works." "No," Sakina said. "You taught me how cowards work." A sharp sound escaped someone in the front row. Half gasp, half disbelief. Mariam's composure cracked. "You ungrateful girl!" "There it is," Sakina said. For the first time, her own voice sounded unfamiliar to her. Not because it was louder, but because it no longer apologized for existing. "You always preferred that word, didn't you, ungrateful? Disloyal. Difficult. It was easier than admitting the truth. And what truth is that? Mariam snapped. That you needed me small. The sentence hit the room like a strike. Mariam's face changed fully then. Not graceful, not elegant, furious. Before she could answer, another voice came from behind the crowd. Enough! Hassan! The ballroom split as he stepped forward. Sakina's breath caught. Her father looked older than he had even a week ago. The lights were too bright for his tired face. His shoulders seemed thinner inside his formal jacket. But he was standing. Not supported, not hidden behind Mariam's arm. Standing alone. Mariam turned sharply. You should not have come. Hassan looked at her with a weariness so deep it almost looked like freedom. No, he said. I should have come much sooner. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different silence. Not shock. Recognition. Something larger was opening. Mariam took one step toward him. Do not embarrass yourself. I already did that, Hassan replied. For years. Sakina felt tears rise before she could stop them. He looked at her then, not as a man glancing guiltily at a wound he had helped create. As a father. Late. Imperfect. Trembling, but real. I failed you, he said. The words were not spoken loudly yet, they carried through the entire ballroom. I let fear sit in my seat. I let illness become an excuse for cowardice. I watched what was being done to you, and every day I told myself I would stop it tomorrow. Mariam's expression turned dangerous. Hassan! He did not look at her. I signed papers I was too weak to resist. I allowed access to accounts that were not hers. I let your mother's belongings remain locked away because I told myself that preserving peace was the same as protecting my family. His voice shook. It was not peace. It was surrender. Sakina could not breathe for a second. All her life she had wanted this. Not his guilt. His truth. And now that it stood in front of her, it hurt almost as much as the years of silence had hurt. Mariam stepped closer, lowering her voice in a final attempt to regain control. Think very carefully. Hassan finally turned to face her. I am. The quiet authority in those two words changed the room again. Jelani moved toward the stage once more and opened another file. This one contained property transfers, account signatures, dates, legal authorizations. Sakina did not understand every detail at a glance, but she understood enough. Her mother's trust assets. Shifted, deferred, reassigned. Pieces hidden through shell arrangements and health-related proxies. And in the center of it all, Mariam's approval chain. Gasps rose again. Now there would be no walking this back as jealousy or gossip or women fighting over status. This was theft. Calculated and patient. Mariam saw it too. For the first time, fear entered her eyes without disguise. Nabira looked from the screen to her mother and back again, as though only now realizing the size of the structure she had been standing inside. Tariq spoke at last, his tone level and devastating. This evening began as an attempt to bury my wife under a lie. It will end with the truth documented, witnessed, and sent where it needs to go next. No one had to ask what he meant. Legal offices, boards, press channels, courts if necessary. Power had shifted. Publicly. Sakina looked at Tariq, at the man who had said too little, hidden too much, tested too hard. And yet tonight he had not let her stand alone. That mattered. It mattered more than she wanted it to, which was exactly why the next wound cut so deep. Because even as justice unfolded around her, another truth was rising inside her chest with painful clarity. Tariq had protected her. Yes. But he had also watched her suffer first. He had let the test run long enough to gather all its evidence. And now, standing in the center of her public vindication, Sakina understood that gratitude and hurt could live in the same heart at once. The room was finally seeing her clearly. But so was she, and what she saw next would not be simple. The ballroom never truly recovered. Even after the screens dimmed, even after the last slide of financial transfers disappeared into black. The air remained charged with the kind of silence that came only after a powerful lie had been dragged into light and left there to twitch. No music resumed. No one reached for small talk. A charity dinner had turned into a reckoning, and every person in that room understood that leaving early would now look like cowardice. Sakina stood where she was, her body upright through discipline alone. Her thoughts were moving too fast. Mariam's voice still echoed in her ears from the recording. Hassan's confession still trembled in the air like something fragile and overdue. And Tariq, calm, deliberate, mercilessly prepared, stood near the stage with the stillness of a man who had waited a long time for the world to expose itself properly. Nabira was the first to lunge for escape. "This is insane," she said, her voice breaking at the edges now. "I'm leaving." She turned sharply toward the main doors. 2 security officers moved at once, not grabbing her, not causing a scene, simply stepping into her path with polite firmness. The crowd noticed immediately. More whispers spread. Nabira stopped short, spun around, and looked for support where she had always found it before, in faces that feared her mother, envied her beauty, or hoped to benefit from standing near her. Tonight, those faces looked away. Imani had already stepped back 3 full paces, as though distance might erase her fingerprints from the scandal. Her eyes darted wildly between Mariam Nabira Jalani and the giant screen that had become the execution wall for every lie she had helped carry. Mariam, however, still had enough pride left to try one final performance. She lifted her chin and faced the room with wounded dignity. "I will not stand here and allow my family to be dissected like entertainment. Whatever disputes exist should be handled privately." Tariq turned toward her. "Private cruelty is still cruelty," he said. "It simply survives longer." The sentence landed so cleanly that nobody breathed for a moment. Mariam's gaze sharpened. "And what would you call this? A public trap? I would call it proportion." There was something terrifying about the way he said it. No raised voice, no smugness, no emotional flourish. Just the flat certainty of a man who had done the math and found mercy insufficient. Jelani stepped forward with a slim folder in hand. "These are certified copies," he said, addressing not Mariam now, but the room. "Property diversion records, unauthorized access logs, message, recovery reports, and witness statements tied to the defamation campaign against Mrs. Sakina Adeyemi and the unlawful transfer of assets held in trust after her mother's death." Several people in the audience visibly stiffened. Unlawful. Trust. Witness statements. The language had shifted from scandal to legal consequence. That terrified respectable people far more than moral failure ever did. A silver-haired attorney seated near the front adjusted his glasses and stood up slowly. Sakina recognized him from charity boards and televised business panels. He was not allied with Tariq, as far as she knew, which was exactly why his presence now mattered. "If those copies are genuine," he said, "then this is no longer a family disagreement. It is potential fraud and coercive manipulation." Mariam turned to him with open contempt. "You have no standing here." He met her stare coolly. "Tonight, neither do you." A murmur of agreement moved across the room. Sakina saw something flicker across Mariam's face, then not shame, not remorse, but calculation collapsing under speed. She had built her life around controlled rooms, private pressure, locked doors, small humiliations that left no witnesses. She did not know how to rule a space once witnesses became evidence. Nabira, by contrast, was unraveling too quickly to strategize. She pointed toward Sakina with a shaking finger. "This is all because of her. She always wanted people to pity her. She enjoyed making everyone think she was some kind of victim." Sakina turned and looked at her fully. The old Sakina, the one who survived by lowering her eyes, would have flinched from the accusation. She would have shrunk, tried to sound reasonable, tried to bleed softly enough to remain acceptable. That girl was gone. No, Sakina said. I enjoyed surviving. The room heard the steel in it. Nabira laughed sharply, almost hysterically. You expect people to believe you were oppressed while living in luxury. Sakina took one step forward. Luxury is not safety, she said. A large house does not become a home because its floors shine. A girl is not protected because her suffering happens behind expensive curtains. The words did not come from rehearsed bravery. They came from years, from swallowed dinners, from lowered eyes, from watching her mother's memory used as leverage, from being moved through her own life like furniture. Mariam snapped, Enough! Sakina did not even look at her. You called me ungrateful every time I refused to disappear conveniently enough. You called me difficult when I remembered what belonged to my mother. You called me useful only when there was humiliation to carry on behalf of this family. Her voice shook once, then steadied. And when I still would not betray the man you assumed was ruined, you decided it would be easier to stain me than to face yourselves. Silence again. But now it was a silence that leaned toward her, not away. Hassan moved closer. His face looked worn, but something fundamental had changed in his posture. He was still a man carrying the shame of too many delayed decisions. Yet delay had finally ended. Even that had weight. She is telling the truth, he said. No one interrupted him. For years, Hassan continued looking not at Mariam now, but at the assembled crowd. I allowed my illness to become a curtain behind which worse things were done. I told myself I was preserving stability. I told myself that confrontation would destroy the family. But the family had already been destroyed. I simply lacked the courage to admit who was doing the destroying. Mariam's composure snapped. Composure? You weak fool, she hissed. You would throw away everything we built because the girl has finally learned to cry in public. The insult hit the room harder than she intended, because no one had ever seen Sakina crying. Not tonight. Not now. All they saw was a woman standing in the center of her own vindication, straighter than many people with easier lives had ever managed to stand. Tariq turned slightly toward Jelani. Proceed. The giant screen lit again. This time, instead of messages or transfer logs, it displayed a sequence of dated photographs and documents. Sakina's late mother's original estate inventory. The locked chest of letters and heirlooms. The trust directives. Hassan's signatures. Medical dates corresponding to his weakest periods. Mariam's authorization notes. Then security footage from an interior office at the Adebayo residence, grainy but clear enough, showing Mariam instructing a clerk to move sealed personal items into a private cabinet under her control. Sakina's chest tightened painfully. Her mother's things. All those years she had been told they were lost, inaccessible, complicated, tied up in paperwork, protected for later. Not lost, taken, not delayed, controlled. Mama Zuena had once told her that the most dangerous theft was the kind that stole memory, because it left the victim doubting not only what was taken, but whether they had the right to miss it. Now the theft stood on a screen in front of half the city. Nabira stared at the images, then at her mother. You said those things were secured for the family. Mariam turned on her instantly. Do not be stupid now. Now. Not don't be foolish. Not you misunderstand. Do not be stupid now. As if Nabira's role had always been obedience dressed as beauty. For the first time, Sakina saw her stepsister not as innocent, not even as forgivable, but as something smaller than she had imagined, a willing accomplice who had never believed she herself could also be used. Imani chose that exact moment to betray the rest. I only shared what Nabira sent me, she blurted out, voice high and cracking. I didn't create any of it. I thought it was just gossip. I didn't know about the property or the letters or quiet Mariam thundered. But the damage was done. Jelani lifted another page from the folder. We also have payment confirmations for the media contractor routed through an account managed by Miss Imani's assistant and reimbursed through a private discretionary fund connected to Mrs. Mariam Adebayo. Imani burst into tears. The room recoiled not out of sympathy but contempt. In elite circles there were many sins people quietly tolerated. Vanity, affairs, greed, strategic marriages, even soft corruption if it wore a silk lining. But clumsy betrayal under pressure disgusted everyone. Tariq stepped forward again, and the room obeyed the movement without being asked. This matter will continue beyond tonight, he said. Appropriate authorities will receive full documentation. Legal recovery procedures are already in motion. Asset freezes have been requested where relevant. Mariam actually laughed at that, but it sounded fractured. You think influence makes you untouchable? Tariq's eyes rested on her with frightening calm. No, he said. I think patterns make you traceable. A few people lowered their eyes at that, because they understood exactly what he meant. This was not a tantrum, not vengeance born in one evening. It was a net that had been tightening quietly while Mariam believed herself still the spider. Then Tariq turned not to the room, but to Sakina. For a second, everything else faded. The chandeliers, the whispers, Mariam's rage, Nabira's crumbling poise, Hassan's exhausted shame. Only that look remained. Measured, serious, clear. Mrs. Adeyemi, he said, and even now he used the title with public intention, your mother's belongings will be returned to you tonight. The trust irregularities will be reversed where the law allows. And your name will be formally cleared before every board, publication, and organization that received the false material. Sakina's throat closed. This was justice. Real justice. Not whispered apologies, not symbolic gestures, not private remorse designed to keep public image intact. Restoration. Yet with it came a deeper ache, because justice did not erase the path it took to arrive. Tariq had delivered truth with precision. He had defended her before the world, and still some quiet hurt inside her remained standing, because he had also watched, measured, waited. The contradiction lived in her like a blade with two edges. Across the room, Nabira finally broke entirely. You always wanted what was mine, she shouted at Sakina. You wanted the attention, the position, the marriage. Sakina cut across her calm and devastating. No, she said. I wanted one thing from that house, to be left with my dignity. You could not even bear that. Nabira fell silent. Not convinced. Defeated. Security moved again, then discreet but firm. Not only around Nabira now, but around Mariam as well. The silver-haired attorney was already speaking in low tones with two other people near the front, likely coordinating next steps. Phones were no longer hidden. Messages were being sent. Calls made. The machinery of consequence had begun. Hassan stood beside Sakina now, but not close enough to claim comfort he had not yet earned. I am sorry, he whispered. Sakina looked at him. For once she did not rush to rescue a man from his own guilt. I know, she said. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was not rejection either. The room around them was shifting into aftermath now. Chairs moving. People rising slowly. Faces arranged into public seriousness. No one wanted to appear entertained anymore, though many had arrived hoping exactly for that. They would leave with a different story. Not that Sakina had been exposed, that she had endured, that Mariam had stolen, that Nabira had lied, that Tariq had not fallen nearly as far as anyone had hoped, and that an entire elegant room had just watched the first chapter of justice close over the wrong people like a door. Sakina drew a breath and felt it reach deeper than it had in years. The fire had not consumed her. It had named everyone else. By the time the night finally ended, dawn already felt closer than midnight. The Kijani Grand Hotel emptied in fragments. Not with the usual after-event laughter, not with lingering vanity and exchanged business cards, but with the tight, sober energy of people leaving the scene of something they knew would be talked about for years. Power had shifted in that ballroom. Reputations had cracked. And for once, the woman everyone had expected to watch collapse was the only one who had not begged to be believed. Sakina stood beneath the hotel's covered entrance, while the cool night air moved against her skin. Her body was tired in ways sleep could not fix. Her mind felt scraped raw. Yet beneath the exhaustion, there was a strange stillness she had never known before. Not peace. Not yet. But the first honest silence after a storm. A black car waited near the curb. Jelani stood several steps away, speaking quietly into his phone. Security moved at a respectful distance. Hassan had already been escorted to another vehicle under medical supervision after insisting twice with trembling insistence that he wanted the legal team to proceed with everything. Mariam and Nabira had left under a very different kind of escort. The world had not softened overnight, but it had finally turned its face toward truth. Tariq stepped out from the revolving doors behind her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He had removed his jacket. His tie was gone. Under the softened lights of the entrance, he looked less like the unreachable strategist from the stage, and more like a man who had carried control for too many hours without setting it down. But even now, restraint lived in him like instinct. Sakina. Just her name. No title now. No performance. She turned to face him. Yes, he stopped at a distance that was careful rather than cold. Your mother's belongings are already being brought to the house. The words hit her with a quiet violence. Her mother's belongings. Not a memory. Not a promise. Not paperwork still under review. Real. Moving toward her. For one dangerous second, gratitude surged through her so sharply that it almost pushed aside everything else. But the ache beneath it remained, because this night had not only returned things to her, it had revealed them, all of them, including him. She held his gaze. Thank you. Tariq inclined his head once, as if gratitude were something he accepted without claiming too much from it. Then he said, The trust recovery team will begin formal reversal proceedings in the morning. It may take time, but the core assets tied to your mother's estate are already frozen from further movement. Again, the precision, the readiness, the protection that came with systems and paperwork and power. Sakina listened. Then she asked the question that had been standing between them for hours. How long? He did not pretend not to understand. How long did you know? Tariq was silent for a moment. Cars moved in the distance. Somewhere beyond the hotel gates, a motorcycle passed. The city was still alive, indifferent and awake. I suspected there was financial misconduct before the wedding, he said at last. I confirmed more after. And the defamation, I knew the attack was coming before the photos spread widely. The answer was honest. It hurt anyway. Sakina looked away toward the dark street. So you let it happen? No. The word came low and immediate. She turned back. His expression had changed only slightly, but enough. Not defensive, not offended, strained. I let them move, he said. There is a difference. There was no difference for me. That landed. She saw it land. For the first time all night, Tariq did not answer immediately because there was no strategy that could improve the truth. Sakina continued, her voice steady, now steadier than she felt. You protected me in the end. You restored my name. You exposed them. I know that. He said nothing, but while you were waiting for evidence to gather, I was living inside the humiliation. I was the one receiving the calls. I was the one standing in that room wondering if my husband believed me or was simply studying me. The word husband sounded strange between them now. Not false, but unfinished. Tarek's jaw tightened once. "You are right," he said. Nothing in her life had prepared her for how much that simple admission would shake her. No excuse, no elegant reframing, no reminder that his method had worked. Just, "You are right." He took one slow breath. "I have spent too many years learning how quickly people betray when pressure is applied. I learned to trust evidence more than language timing, more than declarations, patterns, more than promises." His eyes remained on hers. "That skill has protected me in business. It has also made me capable of causing harm while calling it patience." Sakina felt her throat tighten. This was not the language of a man trying to win an argument. It was the language of a man standing inside his own flaw and refusing to look away. Still, hurt did not disappear simply because it had been named. "You turned my life into part of a test," she said. "Yes, the honesty of it was brutal, and even after you knew enough to stop them, you kept waiting." "Yes." Another brutal truth, not cruelly spoken. That would have been easier. Spoken like a man who had decided not to hide from the damage he had done. Sakina looked down at her hands, then back at him. "Do you know what hurt most?" Tariq waited. "Not that you were rich." His face did not move. "Not even that you were never truly bankrupt." Still he said nothing. "It was that for the first time in my life, I thought I had found a place where I was not being measured for usefulness. And then I realized I had simply entered a more sophisticated version of judgment." The sentence changed him, not visibly to anyone else, perhaps. But Sakina saw it. Something in him seemed to go very still, not with control this time, but impact. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "I did not marry you to humiliate you. I know. I did not protect you tonight because it was convenient, I know. Then what do you need me to understand?" The question came without command, without wounded ego. It was almost unbearable. Sakina took a slow breath. That being right is not the same as being trustworthy. The silence after that felt like truth being written somewhere permanent. Jelani glanced toward them once from a distance, then respectfully looked away. Tariq nodded very slightly. "Yes," he said. "I understand." Sakina believed that he did. And that was exactly why she had to say the next part clearly. "When we go back tonight, I will not go back as if nothing has changed. You should not. I am not ready to stand beside you as though all of this has turned into a love story just because justice was satisfying." A faint shadow moved through his face. Pain, perhaps. Or acceptance. "You should not do that either," he said. She searched his eyes, almost suspicious of how little he was defending himself. "Then hear me fully. I am listening." Sakina stood taller. "If there is any future between us, it will not be built on gratitude. Not for the house, not for the money, not even for what you did tonight." Her voice strengthened with every word. "It will be built on truth told before it becomes useful. On respect that does not require suffering first. On partnership, not observation." Tariq held her gaze. "And if I fail, then I leave," she said. The answer shocked neither of them, because both knew she meant it. For years, Sakina had been arranged, instructed, cornered, transferred. Tonight, perhaps for the first time in her life, she was not asking for the terms of her future. She was setting them. Tariq lowered his head once, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. "That is fair." She almost laughed then, a small, broken sound. "Fair," she repeated. "I have not known that word for most of my life." "Then you should know it now." Something in her softened against her will. "Not forgiveness, not yet, but the dangerous beginning of seeing that he meant what he said. The ride home was quiet, not tense in the old way, not hollow either, just quiet. When they reached the house, the east sitting room had been opened and gently lit. Several sealed boxes rested on the long table. One old wooden chest sat among them, darker than the rest, worn at the corners, familiar in a way that made Sakina stop breathing for half a second. Adana stood nearby. When she saw Sakina, her lined face softened, almost imperceptibly. "They arrived safely," she said. Sakina walked toward the chest, as if any sudden movement might make it vanish. Her fingers hovered over the lid before touching the wood. It was real, slightly rough beneath her fingertips, warmer than she expected from having been carried in. "Would you like privacy?" Adana asked quietly. Sakina nodded. A few moments later she was alone. She opened the chest. The smell came first. Old paper, dried cedar, time. Then the contents. Folded cloth from her mother's family, handwritten letters tied with faded thread, a bracelet she remembered touching as a child, a photograph, small things to anyone else, a whole lost country to her. Sakina sank into the chair and pressed one trembling hand to her mouth. This time when tears came, they did not feel like humiliation. They felt like return. Much later, after the first wave of grief had passed into a quieter kind of mourning, she found Tariq waiting in the hallway outside. He did not step into the room. He did not ask what the letters said. He simply stood there, giving her the dignity of her own sorrow. "I've been thinking," Sakina said. He waited. "My mother left behind more than objects. She left behind proof that I came from someone who wanted me cherished," Tariq said softly. Sakina looked back into the room at the boxes. The letters, the fragments of a stolen inheritance, now beginning to breathe again. "When the legal process is over," she said, "I don't want all of it folded back into comfort." He watched her carefully. "What do you want?" She turned to him. "I want to create something with it. A legal support fund, a shelter, a foundation for women pushed out of their own families, women blackmailed with dependence, women taught to confuse survival with obedience." As she spoke, the idea sharpened from instinct into vision. Not charity for performance, not pity, structure, help, exit routes, protection before scandal swallowed them whole. Tariq's expression shifted something like respect, but deeper because it was not new. Only fuller. "You would be very good at that," said. Sakina held his gaze for a long second. "Then if there is a future here," she said, "that future begins there." He nodded once. "Then that is where we begin. Not as a promise wrapped in romance. As work. As truth. As something sturdier than apology." Sakina looked at him in the quiet hallway of the house she had entered as a sacrifice, and now stood inside as someone entirely different. Not discarded, not tested merchandise, not a girl waiting to be chosen. A woman who had survived betrayal, faced truth, and returned to herself with her hands no longer empty. And for the first time, the future in front of her did not look like a sentence. It looked like a choice. What Sakina's story teaches is painfully simple yet powerful. The people who hurt you most are not always strangers. Sometimes they are the ones who share your roof, your blood, your last name. They call control care silence, peace, and sacrifice duty. But real love never needs your humiliation to survive. Real family does not grow stronger by choosing one child to break for the comfort of others. This story also reminds us that truth may arrive late, but it is never weak. Lies can move fast. They can spread through rooms, phones, and hearts in a single day. But truth has a different kind of power. It waits, it gathers, it exposes. And when it finally stands up, it does not ask permission. Sakina did not win because she was rich. She won because she stayed honest when dishonesty would have been easier. She kept her dignity when everyone tried to price it. She chose self-respect over fear, and that changed everything. And perhaps the deepest lesson is, this healing does not begin when justice happens. Healing begins when you finally understand that your life is not something others get to trade, test, or define. The moment you choose yourself with honesty and courage, your future begins to change. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments, what part hit your heart the hardest, and what would you have done in Sakina's place?